Star Trek, The Next Generation, Starfleet Academy, Number 2, Line of Fire, Chapter 9. Several days had passed, and Paul Dini and Card had decided that a celebration was in order for the two teams. Nothing fancy, of course, for they were colonists of simple means, but it was more than adequate. Unfortunately, the Klingon and Terran definitions of what constituted quality food were very different. So Dini was serving up a meal that was somewhere in between, which was ultimately not totally satisfactory to anyone, but not completely inedible to anyone. The dinner was taking place in one of the multi-purpose buildings. It served as Dini's office, not to mention his quarters. It also had a large dining area for guests, which is where they were at the moment. In the best tradition of Camelot, the table in the dining quarters was round, so that there was no head of the table. Individuals could sit wherever they felt comfortable, and no particular importance was assigned to any one position. Nevertheless, they did tend to cluster by groups. The Starfleet cadets sat with each other, as did the Klingons. Professor Trump, however, made sure to position himself so that he was a physical bridge between the groups. Salida sat to his left, while Gower was on his right. Worf watched with admiration as Trump conversed in a comfortable manner with the Klingon delegation. Salida was looking around. "Where is McHenry?" she asked. Worf now saw that, indeed, there was no sign of Mark McHenry. He frowned and said,
"He is not here yet?"
"It would seem not," said Salida. Tanya turned and looked at Worf, and she said pointedly, "Do you want me to go find him for you, Mr. Worf?" The slight edge in her voice was apparent to everyone at the table. Worf shifted uncomfortably in his chair and said,
"No, that will not be necessary. I will locate him."
"Are you not capable of keeping track of your own people, Mr. Worf?"
asked Gower. Before Worf could answer, Trump said,
"Starfleet personnel are capable of keeping track of themselves, Gower. Mr. McHenry is, very likely, involved in helping some colonists with a difficult situation, and, as a result, is unaware of the time. Mr. Worf, however, is going to be kind enough to find him and remind him of the lateness of the hour. Correct, Mr. Worf?"
"Absolutely,"
said Worf, and then he added,
"And Ms. Tobias will be assisting me."
He looked straight at Tanya, and now it was her turn to feel uncomfortable. But she hesitated only a moment before getting to her feet and saying politely, "Yes, sir." And she followed Worf out the door. The moment they were outside and in the street, Worf turned to her and said in irritation,
"Would you mind telling me what the problem is?"
"Me? What problem could I possibly have?"
"You have been cold and formal with me for several days."
"A subordinate is supposed to be formal with a commanding officer. Didn't you know that?" She started to walk away from him, and he took her by the arm and swung her around.
"Tanya, I thought we were friends."
Her chin twitched, and she said angrily, "Yeah, I thought we were friends too. Then you decided to ream me out just to impress your Klingon girlfriend."
"She is not my girlfriend,"
Worf said indignantly.
"And I was right to say something to you. You should have stopped things from going as far as they did. It is a matter of responsibility."
"No, Worf, it's a matter of respect, and your need for getting Kaler's respect became more important than your consideration for me."
"I have the utmost consideration for you," he said stiffly. "You are simply having difficulty dealing with criticism."
"No, I'm not," she shot back. "What I'm angry about is how you said it, rather than what you said. If you've got a problem with me, or how I'm doing something, then you discuss it with me privately. You got that? You and me, the two of us. All disagreements should always be handled that way, in private. That way the subordinate isn't made to feel that she's being held up to public ridicule in front of her peers, and she can defend herself to her commanding officer without it coming across as insubordination."
"That is not how Klingons do things. You speak your mind and answer for the consequences of your actions. Whoever might be standing around is irrelevant."
"Well, here's a newsflash for you, Worf. You're not part of a Klingon crew. You're part of a Starfleet crew, or at least that's what you're training to become. And if you're having trouble with that, then maybe you should go off and join your Klingon friends." Worf was stunned by her reaction. It seemed out of proportion to the incident that had sparked it, but he knew that it wouldn't hurt him to be a bit more flexible every now and then. In as soft a voice as he could, he said,
Tanya? Tanya, I am sorry. I am very sorry that I have upset you. I will do whatever I can to make sure it does not happen again.
She turned and studied him in the fading daylight. Really? You mean it?
Of course I mean it,
he said. And truly he did. He was aware that there were subtleties to human emotions that he was not yet grasping, indeed perhaps would never grasp. But to remain stubborn in all matters until he did understand them, whenever that time might come, would leave behind him a long road of hurt emotions and feelings. That was no way to live. She finally smiled, and then she stepped forward and hugged him briefly. "Thank you," she said. "And I'm sorry, too."
For what?
You know.
Yes, of course,
he said stiffly. In fact, not knowing, but deciding that it was better to just nod and accept it.
That is quite all right. So, on to the other pressing difficulty of the evening. Where is McHenry?
Actually, that's going to be an easy one. She pointed. There. Sure enough, the red-headed cadet was walking across the street, looking upward, holding the tricorder that he had won during the poker game on the Repulse. He was smiling in a lopsided manner, seemingly delighted with his new toy. At the same time, he was displaying his remarkable knack for keeping track of many things at the same time, because he was unerringly steering himself around passers-by without giving them so much as a glance. "Mac!" called out Tanya. He glanced her way, and then, still looking at the tricorder, made his way over to her and Worf. "Hi," he said. "Aren't you expected somewhere?" she asked, her arms folded. He regarded her curiously. "Is this a trick question?"
We were supposed to be meeting with the others for dinner,
Worf reminded him. McHenry looked surprised. "Is it 1800 hours already?"
Yes.
Huh. Now isn't that annoying? I programmed the tricorder to remind me automatically when it was time for the get-together, and here it didn't. Maybe there's something wrong with it. He paused and then said, "I know."
He's going to hit it again,
sighed Worf. It was how Mark McHenry dealt with any piece of equipment that seemed to be giving him problems. It was annoying for two reasons. First, because it showed an utter disregard for the delicacy of the technology involved, and second, because, aggravatingly, it always seemed to work. "Wait, let me have a look at it," Tanya started to say, but it was too late. McHenry gave it a shot in the side, and then the tricorder obediently beeped at him. "Ah!" he smiled, a direct contrast to Tanya's scowl. "There, the timer has—" But suddenly he was frowning, an expression that rarely crossed his face. "Where'd that come from?" he asked. "What? Where?" McHenry didn't answer her question. Instead, he suddenly craned his neck skyward, aiming his tricorder. And then, galvanized in abrupt action, he shouted, "Get to cover!" He bolted toward Paul Dini's place, leaving a puzzled Worf and Tanya where they were. "What's with him?" asked Tanya. Suddenly, the air seemed to crackle around them, and the ground exploded. Tanya and Worf were hurled in different directions. Worf slammed into a nearby dormitory. From within, he heard shouts, cries of confusion. High above the clouds, beyond the point where he could see the origin of the attack, beams of destructive force rained down. The rough paths through the town were chewed up by the energy blasts. One of the blasts struck a warehouse where grain, the extremely adaptable quadrotriticale that the colonists were in the process of growing on the planet's arid surface, was stored. The building exploded, and grain was hurled everywhere in vast showers. Worf scrambled to his feet just in time to see a huge mountain of grain come pouring down on Tanya. She reached out to him, but she was too far away, and within an eye blink she was buried. He charged forward, uncaring of the danger. All around him, lights suddenly went out, and he was aware that the main generator and quite possibly the backup had been struck. But that didn't matter to him at the moment. None of it mattered except rescuing Tanya. He dove in and started shoveling grain out of the way, digging down toward Tanya as quickly as he could. He shouted her name, told her to hold on. It seemed forever, and he wasn't finding any hint of her. He was starting to despair of saving her, and he was even flashing back momentarily to that traumatic moment when, as a young Klingon, he'd been buried alive during the Romulan attack on Khitomer. But then his hand closed around a wrist, and he gripped it firmly. A hand closed around his upper arm. With only seconds to act, he pulled as hard as he could, hoping that he wouldn't simply yank her arm out of the socket. At first there was no movement, but then he staggered slightly as she shifted within. He took a step back, and then another, and then Tanya Tobias slid out of her entrapment. She was gasping, coughing up grain, while trying to suck air greedily into her lungs. Every inch of her was covered with grain, and she was clawing blindly at the air.
"You are all right,"
he called to her, trying to cut through her panic.
"You are all right."
She said nothing at first, her chest heaving. She coughed, sending a mouthful of grain spewing onto the ground.
"Tanya."
She nodded her head, acknowledging his voice. "I know," she whispered hoarsely. "I know I'm all right. What happened? What the heck happened?"
"We are being attacked."
She looked up at him with a glazed expression. "No kidding." He stood and swung her up into his arms.
"Don't try to talk,"
he warned her. She nodded, taking him at his word. He ran as fast as he could, her additional weight not slowing him at all. Within moments, he arrived back at Paul Dini's command center. The dining table had changed function significantly. Before, it was a place where food was served. Now all the diners were crouched under it, seeking shelter from pieces of the ceiling that were raining down from the attack. The only ones who weren't crouched under there were McHenry and Zach. Both were in the process of heading for the door with a clear intention of going after Worf and Tanya. When Worf entered, Zach immediately ran to him and shielded the two of them with his own body.
"Are you all right?"
he shouted.
"Yes,"
said Worf, lowering Tanya to the ground.
"At least as fine as we can be, considering that someone is trying to kill us."
The pounding, however, seemed to have stopped. Immediately, everyone scattered out from under the table, and Dini called out, "I'm heading to the monitor building."
"I will go with you,"
snapped Worf.
"Hebron, McHenry, with me."
And then, realizing that he might have overstepped his authority since he was barking orders while the professor was around, he turned to Trump belatedly for authority, but Trump just nodded confirmation. "What about me?" said Salida. She did not display irritation in being left behind, but clearly it was on her mind.
"You are the closest thing we have to a doctor with us," replied Worf. "Take care of Tanya. We will be back shortly."
"I'm coming as well," Kalar now said, "and Gower will accompany me."
"What about me?"
demanded Kodash. "You stay here."
"Why?"
"Because I am tired of you getting into fights with the Brickar every time you are together. We do not need bickering now. We need cooperation." Worf growled.
"All right, then. Let us go."
Tanya watched as Worf, Kalar, and the others went out the door. She had been laid flat on the ground. She thudded her head lightly in frustration. The simple fact was that, aside from the fact that she cared for Worf, she disliked the feeling that there was some sort of competition going on for Worf's loyalties. He was Starfleet, one of them. But now that he was around Klingons, was he feeling torn? When the time came to leave Dantar, would the Starfleet cadets be departing with one less member than when they arrived? The idea that the Klingons might be able to offer Worf a sense of friendship, of spiritual communion that no one at the Academy could, was extremely aggravating to Tanya. One always wants to be there for one's friends, and to find that you were coming up short, it was not a feeling she cherished. Kodash, for his part, spat out a curse and then grabbed a tricorder and stomped out the door. Salida didn't know where he was going, nor did she particularly care. She had her own concerns. Although science was her specialty, she had had some training back on Vulcan in the healing arts, since her parents were both medical practitioners. Naturally, the Vulcan physiology was different from humans, but a broken bone was still a broken bone. She did not find any such injuries in Tanya, which was fortunate. But Tobias was still clearly upset and frustrated. Her heart rate was accelerated and her pulse was pounding so fiercely that Salida thought Tanya might pass out. "Lie back," she said softly. "Relax." "Relax? Are you nuts? How am I supposed to relax when—" Salida's fingers brushed Tanya's forehead. Ever so faintly, ever so slightly, her mind touched Tanya's, and she said again, "Relax." Tanya's head obediently sagged back. Her eyes closed. She said distantly, "You know, I I really should relax. I think that would be an excellent idea, Salida agreed. Chapter 10. It's not good. The monitor building was the central point where, as the name suggested, all activities and systems throughout the colony were monitored. There were computer setups as well as readouts on the various operations that kept the colony going. And right now the head monitor, a woman named Greenberg, was less than optimistic. She was pointing to one screen after another. Several were blank, 2 were filled with static. And the ones that were still working were giving her readouts that weren't promising. The backup generator is online now, she said, so we've got some power going. But our long-range sensors are down, not to mention our planetary defense systems. The defense systems being, asked Kalar, 2 standing phaser cannons, and that's it, said Greenberg. Kalar looked appalled. That's it? You have nothing beyond 2 standing phaser cannons?
What about those?
Worf interrupted, pointing to one screen that displayed a landing field with several small ships squatting there inactive.
Are there weapons aboard them?
Dini shook his head. No. Those are just simple transport ships. Emergency vehicles, that sort of thing.
Which they did not touch.
Worf stroked his chin.
Why do you think that is?
Likely it's the same reason they didn't simply destroy this settlement, said Keebran. They want to preserve whatever they can for their own use. Is that your best guess, Brickar? Gower said, making no effort to hide his contempt. Do not be ridiculous. They are just toying with us, that is all. You think you know everything, don't you, Klingon? One does not have to know everything in order to know far more than you. Stop it, both of you, snapped Dini. This is You hit them. It was McHenry who had spoken. They all turned and stared at the soft-spoken astronavigator, who was in turn looking at his tricorder.
What do you mean? Who hit who?
The phaser cannons, McHenry replied. The attack exhibited a drop in emissions that would be consistent with the sudden energy loss if a direct hit were sustained. Obviously, the cannons got off a few automatic shots before they were put out of commission.
How could you tell that from a tricorder? Demanded Gower. It is impossible. No tricorder would have that kind of range.
This one does, said McHenry calmly. Abruptly, the door burst open, and standing there was Kodash. Kalar looked at him angrily and snapped, What are you doing here? I told you to.
I know what you told me, he shot back. And while I was waiting, I ran an analysis on the particle emanations from the blast points. Would you like to know what I discovered?
He stabbed a finger at the Starfleet cadets.
The weapons used were standard phasers of Federation design. We were fired on by a Federation ship, probably Starfleet.
That's ridiculous, snapped Zach. Why would a Starfleet ship attack the colony?
Because there are Klingons here. Why else? That is an insane accusation, Worf informed him.
Is it? Why so? It is a perfect way to dispose of a bunch of stinking Klingons, right? Said Gower contemptuously, taking up Kodash's train of thought. No one would ever suspect that the Federation would be so depraved as to destroy their own people to get at the Klingon colonists. You know as little about the Federation as you do about all other things, Zach said, and his 3-fingered hands started to ball up into fists.
Stop this insanity immediately, said Worf.
Kalar was likewise trying to calm down her people. Dini, satisfied that Worf and Kalar were managing to keep a lid on things, was conferring with Greenberg about needed repairs. Meantime, McHenry was calmly feeding information from the tricorder into the computer base. If you'd like, he said, I can get you an image of our attacker. Yes, by all means, sneered Gower. Let us see the face of the enemy.
Your attacks on the reputation of the Federation are truly pathetic,
Worf said. At that moment, an image appeared on the screen, and there were gasps all around the room. Slowly, Zach Kieran turned to face the astonished expressions of Kalar, Gower, and Kodash. Correct me if I am wrong, said Zach, but that would appear to be a Klingon vessel. True or false?
It is a trick,
snapped Gower defensively. Is it now? Zach's voice became louder, angrier.
And who is it? Who is being tricked, eh? Perhaps every colonist on this world is a butt of your curious little joke. I am telling you it is not true. Why would a Klingon vessel fire upon this world?
Oh, well, crowed Zach, you found it so easy to believe that the Federation would have its reasons, and now you're telling me that a peoples with a history of treachery are incapable of having some sort of dark, sinister motivation for the things they do?
That is enough, both of you,
snapped Worf, and Kalar echoed, Yes, more than enough. Worf continued,
We do not know what is going on up there, so we must...
The important thing, Deanie interrupted, is to defend ourselves should this attacker return. He'll most likely return, said McHenry calmly. We damaged him, but I doubt it's something he can't repair, and then he'll be back with guns blazing, ready to blow us off the face of the planet. After a moment's thought, he added, That's a worst-case scenario, of course. We could evacuate, offered Greenberg.
The moment we leave the planet's surface, we would be targets for them, said Worf. We've only got one chance. We have to repair the phaser cannons.
But they've been destroyed, Greenberg pointed out.
Yes, I know, Worf said sarcastically. I doubt they would need repair if they had not been.
It's not possible, said Deanie flatly.
Of course it is possible. The only question is whether it is possible within whatever time we may have left.
I think you'll be needing my help then. It was Tanya who had spoken. She was standing in the doorway looking a bit woozy, but otherwise determined. Behind her were Selita and Professor Trump.
You should be resting, said Worf sternly.
If I get buried under 2 tons of rubble, I'll have all eternity to rest. She's fine, Worf. Good enough for what needs to be done at any rate, Selita assured him.
All right, fine. Let's get over to the planetary defense systems. What is left of them anyway? That has to be our first priority. That and getting the main generators back online. We will need the additional power they'll provide.
Everyone filed out, with the last to go being Worf and Zach. But Worf stopped his roommate, and when he spoke, it was with a dark scowl.
What was that supposed to mean? He demanded.
What was what supposed to mean?
That comment about a peoples with a history of treachery.
Oh, that. Kieran gave a dismissive wave. He angered me, that's all. I certainly hope you're not taking that personally.
How else am I supposed to take it? I thought we were past all that, Zach.
We are. You and I are. But you're not like them.
No, Zach. I am like them. I am far more like them than I am like you or Tanya or anyone else here, and I will appreciate it if you do not slander my people in that manner.
Your people, said Zach, bristling, have a history of... But then he stopped. Fine, he said, fine. I see no point to carrying on with this, especially since we will most likely be dead within a few hours.
If we are fortunate, replied Worf, we will survive long enough to kill each other.
One can only hope.